How's it going, everyone? There appears to be a paradox in Canadian polling data, which was revealed after Donald Trump's recent joke about annexing Canada. People were quick to point out that it would not be in the Republicans' interest to annex Canada because Canadians would have overwhelmingly supported Harris, and at the same time it was claimed that most Canadians lean right-wing, and there is data to support both claims. So there's your paradox. If most Canadians lean right-wing, how is it that most Canadians would support Harris? Well, it turns out it's not a paradox at all. If we look a little bit deeper into the numbers, everything becomes very clear. And that's exactly what we're going to do. And we will start with the numbers suggesting that most Canadians would support Harris. So that data comes from this result here, this study here, which was done in October 2024, asking Canadians how they feel about the American election. So let me show you the exact numbers that are being referred to. So we're just scrolling down, and here we are, okay? This figure right here, okay? So the red bars are 2024, and they're showing how Canadians answered the question, which candidate would you most like to see win? And 60% answered Harris, and 21% answered Trump. So Harris here was the clear favorite. Now 18% said they don't know. Even if we assume that most of the don't know or undecided voters are pro-Trump, and there has been some data from the US suggesting that that is the case, even then you have 60% pro-Harris and approximately 40% pro-Trump. It's still a large margin in favor of Harris. So why is that a paradox? Well, it's a paradox when we look at the fact that in Canada, the Conservative Party right now is very popular. This is the mainstream right-wing Canadian party. If an election were held today, the Conservatives would win 227 seats in Parliament out of a total of 338. That's approximately 2/3 of the seats in Parliament would be won by the Conservative Party. The Liberal Party, second place, wouldn't even come close with only 47 seats. If we break it down by province, the Conservatives would win 9 out of 10 provinces. And if we include Canada's territories, Conservatives would win 10 out of the 13 provinces and territories. Now, if we look at popular vote, we again see the Conservatives are far in the lead with 43% of the popular vote. The Liberals have 22% and the NDP have 19%. Those are Canada's two left-wing parties. Even if we add their votes, 22 plus 19, that gives us 41% of Canada voting for the two main left-wing parties. 41 is still less than 43% voting Conservative. So there's the paradox. If Conservatives are so popular in Canada, then how is it that support for Donald Trump in Canada is so low? Well, it turns out this paradox is very easily explained by the following chart. When we look at Canadian opinions between Donald Trump and Kamala Harris, but broken down by party support. If we look at the opinions of Liberal and NDP supporters on this chart here, well, they overwhelmingly support Harris, shown by this blue bar here. And if we look at the Conservatives, well, Trump is more popular among Conservatives, with 44% of Conservative supporters saying they would prefer Donald Trump, but it's not an overwhelming majority. It's not in the 80s like Harris support among Liberals and NDP. It's in the 40s, and you have 36% of Conservatives who actually would have supported Harris. Now, this might still seem paradoxical, right? Like if Conservatives are so popular and Trump is the preferred candidate among Conservatives, Why is it that only 21% of Canadians support Trump? Well, think of it this way. A little bit less than 50% of Canadians support Conservatives. What's 44% of 50? It's 22. So if a little bit less than 50% support Conservatives, then we could conclude that a little bit less than 22% of Canadians are Conservative Trump supporters. Okay, so a little bit less than 22, but also you got a little bit of Trump support among Liberals and NDP and the other parties. So one factor would bring the number down, one factor would bring the number up, and as a result, you can expect that approximately 22% of Canadians would support Trump. And that is exactly what we see all the way up here. Okay? 21% instead of 22%, close enough. There is no paradox. It'll be easier if I use some simpler numbers. If half of Canadians are conservative, and half of the conservatives would have supported Donald Trump, and approximately no one else would, what's half of half? 1/4, 25%. And that's approximately what we see, 21%. There is no paradox in the numbers. All of the numbers make sense. Where one might say there still is a paradox is specifically in the conservative numbers right here. Why is it that conservatives in Canada are not overwhelmingly pro-Trump the way that Liberals and NDP are overwhelmingly pro-Harris? Or, putting it a different way, why is it that over a third of conservatives support Harris, despite the fact that she is left-wing and the conservatives are right-wing? Well, there's two reasons. One reason is just that the Canadian Conservatives and the American Republicans are two different parties. On the American political spectrum, conservatives would be considered more centrist rather than right-wing, and so it's easy to imagine why centrists, from an American perspective, it's easy to imagine why centrists would be so popular in Canada and why centrists would be sort of split between supporting Harris or Trump. But there's another reason, which has to do with an issue that comes up with all polling. When you ask a polling question, you have to be very careful about how you word your question, because the same question can be interpreted in different ways, leading to a different answer. Look at this wording. Which candidate would you most like to see win? This question can be interpreted in different ways. Some Canadians might read that and think, if I were American, who would I vote for? Other Canadians would read that and think, as a Canadian, who would I benefit more from being the U.S. president? In other words, as a Canadian, which U.S. president would I want my Canadian government working with? Harris or Trump? And there's actually a third interpretation, which has to do with the fact that a lot of Canadians have family in the United States. And that third interpretation is, which leader would be better for my family members who are in the United States? And here the answer would depend on the situation of those family members. So you have three different interpretations that could lead to three different answers. And that is more likely to affect the conservatives. Because if someone is left-wing, liberal, or NDP, well, it's easy to imagine why, regardless of what interpretation they go with, they would prefer Harris over Trump. But if someone is right-wing, then interpretation really matters. Because they might think, well, Trump would be a strong leader, which is good for the United States, but is it good for Canada to have a United States with a strong leader? And conservatives would be split on that. And we see that split right here, with 44% preferring Trump and 36% preferring Harris, and 20% claiming that they are undecided. And what's interesting is that this divide is exactly what Trump's joke was about. Apparently, the joke was something along the lines of, well, if Canada can't succeed without ripping off the US, then maybe we should annex you. Okay, what does that joke imply? If Canadians have to choose between Canadian success and United States success, well, then why don't we just become one country and then you don't have to make that choice? Well, that's exactly what these two main interpretations are. If a Canadian reads this question and thinks it means, if I was American, who would I vote for? They're thinking of it in terms of American success. If they're reading it thinking, as a Canadian, what would benefit me more, a Trump presidency or a Harris presidency? Well, then they're thinking of it in terms of Canadian success. So it's very interesting that the joke revealed a polling paradox, which isn't a paradox at all, and the key which unravels the paradox is actually the very subject that the joke was about. I found that pretty interesting. So, hopefully you did too, and until next time, enjoy.